Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon to those joining us here in Hyde Park and also those joining us online. My name is Chris Weed. I'm Executive Director of the Stiegler Center for the Study of the Economy in the State. Today, we are happy to discuss media coverage of the war in Ukraine across the world with journalists from the Stiegler Center's Journalists in Residence program. Brooke Fox of ProMarket will be moderating the conversation for us. Before we begin, please note that we are on the record and the event is being recorded. For those of you in the audience, we ask you to hold questions until the end. As usual, the views expressed by guests are their own, not those of the Stiegler Center or the University of Chicago. We hope that you'll join us for more upcoming events, including the third installment of our series on China's political economy, this time focusing on the country's zero COVID strategy, which we'll be holding virtually on June 10th. You can check out our websites for more details, as well as the Stiegler Center's publication, promarket.org, and also the Capitalism podcast. You know, often at business school, when we talk about other countries, we often think about it almost in the hypothetical or in the abstract. We see a gross domestic product number. We see a country's indicator of a country on a time series with a bunch of other countries. We may even venture out and read an article. But we often, our analysis and thinking doesn't go much past that. And we get very focused on the US and EU and even particular on the United States. It's one of the reasons we established the Journalists in Residence program in 2017, not only to give journalists from around the world an opportunity to study at the best business school on the planet, but also to give students, faculty, and other members of the Booth community a chance to interact and engage with their different perspectives. And we can not think of a more pertinent and salient way to compare ideas and views across the world than the war in Ukraine. And so if you would, please allow me to briefly introduce our speakers. To my right, left to right, something like that. Stephanie Tondo is a financial and economics reporter who has worked for O Globo and Extra in Brazil. Tanya Thomas is an independent financial and sustainability journalist based in Mumbai, India. Giovanna Baganato, is a senior economy editor at Domini in Italy. Rodrigo Cardenas is the editor of La Tercera's business section based in Chile. Adesola Afolabi is the deputy editor of Steers Business based in Nigeria. And moderating the conversation today is my colleague, Brooke Fox. Brooke is managing editor of the Stiegler Center's digital publication ProMarket and is also a member of the inaugural 2017 Journalists in Residence. And without further ado, I turn it over to Brooke.
Thanks, Chris. Everyone can hear me? Okay. Welcome. I am excited. I'm not sure how many students were aware that you had a cohort of international journalists taking classes with you this quarter, but if you weren't, now you are. And I think it's a great opportunity to talk about a massive international event that is sort of making waves in international trade and foreign policy, in tensions between democracies and autocracies. So it's a great opportunity, especially for those of you who have international aspirations, and for those of us in the US who just benefit from getting out of our bubble. I do want to also just mention that someone who sat in your seats a year ago was a Ukrainian journalist, Olga Rudenko, who recently went back to Ukraine after she finished this program, started a newspaper called the Kyiv Independent, which many of you may have become aware of recently. She recently was recognized with a Pulitzer, I believe, and was on the cover of Time magazine for her work. So it just goes to show how important good journalism is to the international community. And with that, I think I should turn it over to you all to give us a high-level overview of the political and economic consequences of the war in Ukraine in each of your respective countries. You can start.
Yes, thank you very much, Brooke, and thank you guys for having us. I'm going to start from, I guess, the political angle in terms of how the war is, essentially affecting us politically. Nigeria is one of the, I guess, 141 countries that have condemned Russia's invasion on Ukraine. We have also kind of like banned Nigerians that really want to go fight for Ukraine, because there are Nigerians back home, in Ukraine that are passionate about supporting Ukraine and believing that, Russia is just, being a big bully. And some of them have expressed, their passion and their desire to go and fight with the Ukrainian army. However, the Nigerian government is not in support of that, just because there's a thin line, or there's a fine line between, I guess, paying for mercenaries from other countries to come and fight, and getting your citizens out of the country to go fight for Ukraine. However, we do support Ukraine, and we are not in support of Russia's invasion. We've made that very clear in voting with 141 other countries. But in terms of how the war is playing out, I think one major issue is the international trade, which is an economic concern in the country. As you might know, Nigeria is one of the top oil producing countries in the world. And the supply strategies from the war with Russia and Ukraine, Russia is also one of is one of the highest oil producers in the world, and the tension is causing a global shortage. So what's that? Essentially, what that means for oil producing countries is that the price of oil has increased quite all right. It's increased over 45% since the invasion. However, where this should be a positive for us. For example, it improves our foreign reserves, but the price of oil is much higher. We are exporting at a much higher rate. There are internal tensions in the country that doesn't equate to a net gain for us, because even though we export oil, we still import refined oil. So because the prices are high, there are literally no gains, for the Nigerian economy. So that's impacting our foreign reserves. That's impacting economic stability. As you also know, Russia is a major wheat producer, and wheat is very important for most of the stable food that we consume, from bread to spaghetti to confectionery products. But the shortage of and the high price of wheat is also impacting food inflation. Food inflation is almost at 20% now, and even before the war, 6 out of every 10 Nigerians were food insecure. So now it's almost 8 out of 10 Nigerians. So it's a major social and economic issue. With the war dragging, I think what is imminent is hunger, severe hunger amongst Nigerians. Another, I guess, issue is natural gas, which obviously countries like Germany or European countries are trying to,
reduce their dependence on
Russia.
Russia.
Exactly, reduce their dependence on Russia. Fortunately, Nigeria also has the 9th largest gas reserves in the world. However, for us to be able to take advantage of, the supply shortage, we will need, massive investment to be able to, develop the pipelines and I guess infrastructure to be able to supply Europe. I guess on that front, just because gas is one of the cleanest, I guess, fossil fuels in the world, it looks like it could be a promising situation for us to take advantage of. However, it's something that we still need, those investments I spoke about, and at the moment they're not forthcoming. So essentially, I think just to wrap it up, one major issue that we are really concerned about in Nigeria is the imminent hunger. Inflation is rising rapidly with the war dragging. Yeah, it's not looking good for us back home.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting that while it would normally be a boon for you to have oil prices be high, because the refining processes are not in Nigeria, you end up, you told me that the reserves were actually declining.
Exactly.
Because they were having to import now higher priced refined gas.
oil.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rodrigo, do you want to tell us about Chile?
Thank you. Well, as you know, it's difficult to find a more physical distant country than Chile from the war, from Ukraine today. But that doesn't mean that we don't have some main or strong consequence from the war. The main, of course, in Chile is economics. for like in Nigeria for the international price of wheat and oil. Chile is an importer of most of the wheat oil that we consume every day, and for all the fuel, all the oil comes from other countries. So as for now, then come from Russia or from Ukraine. The price, the higher price that we have today, we have an important impact in our country, especially because our main food in Chile is bread. We are one of the largest consumers of wheat per capita in the world, with 140 kilos every year, more than double than the average, the world average. So we are very concerned about that, the price of the wheat and the oil. And for the oil, all come from Brazil and some from United States. So we don't have so many direct ties with Russia from Ukraine, but international prices have a lot. But I think the more interesting part for us is the political point of view. In Chile, there is a broad pro-Ukrainian view or pro-Ukrainian vision and support from all the political parties, or most of them. But the president who ended the term in March, who was a right-wing president, condemned Ukraine, very strong condemned Russia, I mean. And the new president, who is a left-wing president, also condemned Russia for the invasion. So we are a pro-Ukrainian view there, but there is still a smaller group of extreme left you can say, who have no declared support to Ukraine, particularly the Communist Party in Chile, which they is part of the current government, and who have more like an anti-imperialist vision, like more like they still think about Russia like a Soviet Union even today. So every country who are against the United States, I think they support a little more. So there was a Congress resolution like 3 weeks ago in Chile. There was a parliament resolution condemning Russia, and everybody voted in favor except this 8 members of Congress. They are from the Communist Party, and that you can understand that because they are more aligned with the government in the region, who are more in the left, like the Venezuela government, Cuba government, or Nicaragua. They are the country that show support to Russia in this past month, and that's interesting because Russia during the recent years tried to increase the influence that they have in Latin America. In Venezuela itself, they sell weapons to Venezuela, they sell weapons to Cuba and Nicaragua, but they want to have more links with countries like Brazil. Stephanie gonna talk more about that, with Bolivia, with Argentina, and among others. So actually, in fact, Argentina buys the whole first part of the vaccination process that they have from COVID in the Russia vaccine, Sputnik. Actually, 2 weeks before the war, Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina, they say they want Argentina become the Russia getaway to Latin America. They want more invest for Russia in Argentina. Bolivia had a lot of investment too. In Chile, we don't have any great investment for Russia, so we are more like far away from that. But I think the map that Russia wants to create in Latin America with more people would support them. Maybe that could change now with the war. So we have to see what's going to happen in the next few months, because most of the people, they don't like that Russia interest in Chile. In Chile, we don't have any, but in the other countries could be also a problem. So we have to see that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Giovanna?
Thank you to everybody, and thank you, Brooke, for this invitation. Italy and Russia have deep ties and historical ties. So, I mean, this conflict for Italy means really to be at a crossroad for a lot of point of view. We have annexed in 2021. Our trade exchange with Russia was 27 billion. The most part was represented by energy imports. We depend on Russian for more than 45% of our gas supply. And we have also 7 billion of export of goods that we export to Russia. That means a wide array of industries. For example, luxury goods, machineries, food. Our business community has always been, in favor of a good relationship with Moscow. But, Italy, that Italy is a shape of a boot, but Italy thinks to itself also like a bridge for historical reason. When the war began, there was a really shock for a lot of group of interests, and there was pressure on the government from the business community, but at the same time, there was an emotional shock on the public opinion to react to this aggression. So what happens is that in the first days, the European Union really react in a compact way, and also Germany and Italy, that are the countries that are most involved. They have deeper ties with Russia, make sharp decision. And for us, the sanctions, they completely half our GDP, and and the Bank of Italy previewed that if the war is going to continue, we almost deleted the rebound of the pandemic for this year. Our Prime Minister is the former central banker of Europe, Mario Draghi, handled the situation in a very sophisticated way. He suggests to our partner and also to the United States to freeze the Russian central bank's assets. At the same time, there was no, compromise on the embargo of oil and gas. So the situation now is a sort of paradoxical situation. That we can't deny that we are financing the war, because to be independent from Russia gas, we need 3 years. So our deadline is in 2024. At the same time, we have partners in Europe like Hungary that is opposed the idea to ban the oil and gas imports. But what I want to say and underline is that this conflict really shake the alliance in Europe. The Eastern Europe countries and the Western Europe countries can had a sort of deep misunderstanding about Russia, and they didn't understand each other, because the Western Europe lived for a long period a sort of distrust towards the United States approach. But you have to understand that this trust came from the Bush administration approach. So the Western countries were trying to find a sort of European independent approach toward Russia, and the Eastern countries were really, Finland has 3,000 kilometer border with Russia. But not only Finland, the Baltic countries were really sharp on this issue. I think that we undervalue what was happening in the Kremlin and what was happening in the Putin mind, because I mean, the ideology of a new Great Russia, it really grew during the last years. Another thing I want to underline is that we are trying to be independent from the energy supplies from Russia back. There are also different mechanisms of the energy market that are undermine this effort, because the energy market works in two ways. You have the long contracts, and we have a lot of contracts here with Russia, and you have also the spot price that is influenced by the current situation of the current variation of the price. So the problem is that the war in Ukraine influenced the spot prices, so the current ones, and countries tend to rely on the long contracts. That means that we rely more on Russia than before. I know that it's a paradox, but at the same time, we have this great, energy market in the Netherlands. It's the European reference market for oil and gas. And the price of gas is composed by, the price of gas influences also the price of renewable energy, because technically the price of renewables are based also on the price of gas. So the problem is that if nowadays, when the price of gas rise, also the price of all the other kind of energy rise. This is, it's going to put in discussion also our, transition energies, etc. I can say a lot of things also about the political situation, but you can stop me. You know that our former Prime Minister Berlusconi was a good friend of Putin. But in Italy, we say that the history repeats itself first like a tragedy and then like a comedy. And we had another political leader, that is Matteo Salvini, that is the leader of Lega, the League, allied with Marine Le Pen, but was our former prime minister in 2018. And his party is in an agreement with the Putin party, Russia United Russia. And he made also some public gesture to support Putin in the recent year, going to the Red Square in Moscow with a T-shirt supporting Putin, something like that. We discovered now that Russia was trying to influence the resolution in Italian parliament. I'm proud to say that we know that because of good investigative reporting published by a consortium of European journalists. And we know that there were this negotiation to pay this party to present a resolution against sanctions after the war in Crimea. But I say that now the second time that the history repeats itself like a comedy, because in the first days of the war, Salvini tried to renovate his image, and you have to think to the beginning of the war for Europe like a very emotional moment and very shocking moment. And he went to Poland at the border with the Ukraine to express his solidarity with Ukrainian refugees. I mean, but a far-right mayor in this Polish city at the border publicly criticizing him and mocking him to be a supporter of Putin. So the good thing is that European public space grew a lot in the last months, and in the political alliances were shaken by the conflict. Now you can find, I mean, far-right political parties in the Eastern Europe that agree with, for example, the German Greens to have a very I mean, harsh approach towards Russia. But at the same time, now we are facing a different movement. If at the beginning, the public opinion was really driven by this sentiment of solidarity towards Ukraine, now the fear of an escalation, the impossibility or difficult to see a ceasefire on the horizon, and I mean,
is it sort of complicating the public opinion?
Yeah.
Because we had very pro-Ukraine, and I
Yeah.
think in the US we get a lot of pro-Ukraine media
We had-
coverage, but now it's like a little bit more complex
We
in
had
Italy
this-
and in Western Europe.
we have this shift in public opinion, and I mean, the percentage of people that want a ceasefire now in Italy is 47% now.
And when you say ceasefire, do you mean?
It's like, okay, stop with the weapons, stop with the killings, because I mean, Italy has also, I mean, left movement very strong, but also, for example, Catholic movements. I mean, there is a very large part of the public opinion that fear the consequence of the war, and also thinks to the war like an evil in itself. So I mean, the problem is that it's ethical to send weapons to Ukraine. Our government is trying to find a very fragile, but I mean, difficult balance, and he continued to send weapons to Ukraine. The government seen 3 decrees. At the same time, our foreign minister prepared a plan of peace. That is not, I mean, it's a path to a possible negotiation, and he presented the plan to the United Nations, the United States government, and to our partner. The news from today is that Russia objected the plan, but
It seems like Western Europe has been trying to facilitate a lot of sort of cooling of both sides. I'm guessing, Tanya, you have a much different perspective on especially on the pro-Ukrainian question.
Well, I
Not personally, but
bit of hot water situation, yeah. But India's views, like my views, my retelling of where India stands on the Ukraine war is going to be very different from the rest of the panel. And there are different reasons for that. Primarily that the only sustainable foreign policy for any country is national self-interest. So in keeping with that, India has always criticized any wars, any invasions that infringe on any country's territorial integrity. But we stopped far short of criticizing Russia. We continue to trade with Russia. We have not adopted sanctions, and I think it's highly unlikely that India will adopt sanctions against Russia. And as the largest democracy in the world, India has under a lot of criticism from the West, from the US, diplomatic back and forth between America and nudging India towards taking a stronger stance. But India hasn't, and I don't think it will. And the reasons are multifold. The first is that this is surprising to many Americans, but India has had a very long, very warm relationship with Russia, which dates back to newly independent country, 1947. Soviet Union was one of the champions for a newly independent India at the time. They've invested a lot in structure. There's a lot of cultural exchange that's happened over the years. There's a lot of aid, a lot of in terms of economic crises, in terms of when India has had wars with its neighbors, Pakistan, China. India's relationship with Russia is often a deterrent against escalating attacks on India's territory. So, given the context, the history of this relationship, to the average Indian, Moscow is a friend, and to convince an average Indian that even now speaking out against Russia is in India's interest is a very high threshold. So you can see this in the Indian media's coverage of the war, that while we do speak about the loss of life in Ukraine, we do want the war to end. There is, even in the independent media, there is no outright criticism of Russia, because along with the relationship with Russia, there is also wariness of NATO and NATO's expansion across Europe, coming very close to Asian borders. So for much of Asia, it's a delicate balance of not alienating the West, but also making sure that our territorial interests are taken care of. So that's the history of the relationship between Russia, and that's why India refuses to adopt sanctions against Russia. Besides this, we have, our relationship with Russia also has to do with arms supplies. India imports about 80% of its defense military hardware from Russia. We are trying to expand that base of countries that we buy from. We're expanding to France now, to Israel, but we're still heavily, especially the Indian Army, is still heavily dependent on Russia's defense supplies. India is an energy importer. We import oil, gas. We import not much from Russia, but we also depend on Russia's advocacy for India in the UN Security Council, where Russia has often been the only advocate for India in these forums. So it doesn't behoove India's interest to speak out against Russia. And at the same time, while we recognize that the invasion of Ukraine is unjust and there is the loss of life is terrible, and we do want the world to stop, India should be doing more in on that front. But what I believe the West needs to understand is that India is now strategically a difficult position to do more than it can do at the moment.
Yeah, because there's also this element being from India, and I know Stephanie's going to talk about it in a minute as well, but is being part of the BRICS, right? The group of countries. So that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So, and this was something that I hadn't really heard about or talked about for probably 5 or more years. But my understanding is that in Brazil, in India, that grouping is quite important.
Right.
So yeah,
So groupings like the BRICS, they're not strategic alliances, not military alliances, unlike the NATO. They're just trade agreements. They're not even trade agreements. They're just like preferential trading partners, which was first set up to help developing countries find common markets. But of course, the economic reasoning for it then devolves into strategic reasoning as well. That if we are economically linked, we don't want to upset that balance too much.
Stephanie.
So Brazil has adopted a neutral position in the war, and like India has not imposed any sanctions against Russia. The country condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, the Brazilian diplomacy criticized the delivery of guns from Europe and the US to the Ukrainian army. But I think it's important to say that the neutrality of the Brazilian foreign policy is not something new. It's a kind of a historical tradition. And even during the World War II, Brazil took some time to support the Allies against Germany. I mean, it was Hitler, and that happened only in 1942, 2 years after the beginning of the war. So it's our way of dealing with this kind of situation. But coming back to the war in Ukraine, it is also important to remember that Brazil and Russia are part of the BRICS. So it's not economically interesting for the country to come into conflict with Russia. And there's also the fact that Bolsonaro has, like has a good relationship with Putin and doesn't like Biden very much. So despite our diplomatic tradition of neutrality, the president has gone more towards supporting Russia at this moment. Maybe if Trump was still president, things were going to be a little bit different.
Because your president preferred Trump to Biden.
Yeah. Recently, however, Bolsonaro has said that he is worried about the effects of the war on the country's inflation. This is an electoral year in Brazil, and higher prices are always bad for candidates if you're the current president. So he will probably be going to speak more about peace in this moment and trying to end the conflict, but speaking about ending the conflict. Just to explain the inflation, we are affected by the international prices like other countries, even though Brazil is a large producer. And the other thing is that about 20% of Brazil's supplies of fertilizers come from Russia. So the price is almost doubled since the beginning of the war, and it affects the prices of food in the country. This is also one of the economical reasons why Brazil has not imposed sanctions on Russia. Agribusiness is one of the biggest supporters of Bolsonaro's government, and keeping these companies, these farmers happy is really strategic for Bolsonaro campaign this year. And although Brazil is a large exporter of commodities like oil and soy, for example, I think Rodrigo said it to me, oh, you could benefit from the high international prices. But what is happening is that we are having difficulties exporting to Russia right now because of the sanctions. So we don't have Brazilian companies doing sea transportation, for example. So we depend on international companies, and some of them are refusing to deliver to Russia. And another thing is that inflation erodes the fiscal gains that the country could have from the increase in the value of exports. The public opinion in Brazil is mostly on the side of neutrality. Half of the population does not agree with the aggression promoted by Russia, but 64% think that the country should not give financial support to Ukraine, and 73% say the country should avoid becoming involved militarily in the conflict. 84%, however, say the country should welcome Ukrainian refugees. So,
Very interesting. I want to, first of all, I just think this is fascinating how much difference there is from the American sort of perspective on just being so pro-Ukraine and so anti-Russia and taking out so many, the hard line on sanctions we've taken when, others don't necessarily follow suit for various historical and strategic reasons. One thing I want each of you to, or maybe not each of you, but if you have a take on this, is to talk a bit about China and the influence of China in your various countries and maybe in the continent more generally, because you may have some insight into that, as well as this isn't about the American position, but I'm just curious, I think some of your countries have we may be ignorant to some of the less positive views of the American involvement in this conflict as well. So China, rest of content, America, if you can, and then I want to make sure we can open it up to questions after that. Yeah, go ahead, Rodrigo.
Yeah, I was talking earlier about how Russia wants to influence more in Latin America.
Yeah.
And that's become an issue, a situation after when the Trump administration came to power here in America, because Trump, they didn't care so much about Latin America, so they they left all the continent open to others come there and try to influence more. One was Russia, and the other, of course, was China. So today in Latin America, there is a lot of China influence. In Chile, there is a lot because we have a lot of investments in China, a lot of Chinese companies. They are in Chile actually are a company who make vaccine from COVID is making a producer plant in Chile, and China is all Latin America. And that's why Russia said, okay, we're going to go there too and try to influence there and become more friendly with this country and take advantage that United States, they didn't care anymore, or they care less, you can say, that before, because for United States, always they said like Latin America, like part of their influence aspect or aspect, so they had to be more there more. So now they're trying to this other big power. They try to capitalize that the United States they care a little less. So I think there is like there is a kind of rush between the countries. So between these big countries, so where I could put my card and like you say, like Russia decide to go probably with Venezuela, with all these more left-wing sides countries, and if you are in Latin America, you are more from the left, especially the extreme left. If you are a center left, like most of the country, you are more like I said before, more like pro-Ukraine, more like pro Western civilization, you can say. But if you go to the extreme left, you are more like aligned with Putin and Russia, like all these other countries, because they have common interests. Like I say, like Putin, they sell weapons to Venezuela, they sell weapons to Bolivia, to Nicaragua, they sell vaccine to Argentina, they're doing business with Brazil today. So, and there is it's going to be an interesting thing to see in the next couple of years. What is China going to do about that? Is China going to put more influence to Latin America? Is the first partner, like trade partner for Chile today, in the number one for Chile is China today, and second is United States. Like, historically, United States always was the first for Chile, and today is second. So
yeah, and I think it's important to talk about China, especially because of the recent Biden comments about sort of defending Taiwan militarily were China to invade, and that would have probably equally, if not more massive economic waves throughout the international community.
Yeah, but for a small country like us, we don't have so much that we can do about it. So
right,
it's like,
but you are open to, but others come to try to influence things in your country.
Yeah.
I know there's not much of influence. I know like 30% of our external debt is, to China. China, loans Nigeria a lot of money. So you imagine that, okay, they could be influential in who Nigeria's, political who we influence or who we support. I mean, just like Chair, there's really not much you could do except maybe yeah, let your people go support or fight for, you know, whichever country that they want to, and maybe in this case Russia, just because, you know, China is somewhat aligned with, you know, Russia, but yeah, there's not much influence when you think about it. Yeah.
China's right next door. Yes. But India's approach to its foreign policy has always been it's best to have multiple superpowers and not just one. So why we've always been non-aligned with the Western bloc, the Soviet bloc in the past, now we have China, which is right at our doors, which is infringed on territories in India, in Kashmir, in the north, and Arunachal Pradesh, northeast. So it's China is, you know, another superpower. So I think what India thinks is that India does not want Russia to lose its primacy in this global game of strategic interests, because then it leaves India at the mercy of China, which is far larger than us militarily, much more robust GDP. We fought one war with China in the past. We lost. Some will go well for us. If you know, we're left to just dealing with China on our own, and India's relationship with Russia ensures that there is a certain deterrent for China if it were to attack India. On the other hand, we have Pakistan to our left, which is a very close ally of the states, which India has always claimed sponsors terrorism within our borders. So we sort of started finding the development we do see in India between, you know, Pakistan on one side, China on the other. China's investing all across Asia, in Sri Lanka. A lot of the infrastructure that happens across Southeast Asia, South Asia is funded by China, and it's done on highly concessional loans, which China is okay with starting way back also. So it's sort of the way of enforcing political power through a country's economics. So that's why if you look at the invasion now, a lot of Asia, unlike Europe, unlike Latin America, unlike North America, most of Asia, in fact, has refused to sanction Russia because Asia recognizes that it's in their best interest to keep Russia going. And except for South Korea, except for Japan, Taiwan, and I think Singapore, no other Asian country has imposed sanctions on Russia. And the reason is we're trying to maintain this balance of power in Asia, especially in the Asian continent, between Russia, the US's policy of imposing its interests in the ocean, and between China. So you can't sway either side too much.
That is not to Brazil, China is a huge trading partner. Although Bolsonaro has said some things in the past that have said that the Chinese, we as a country still have a pretty good relationship with China. But a funny thing that regarding to the US, you said, we have these elections this year where we have Bolsonaro on one side and Lula on the other side. And they disagree with mostly everything, but one thing they agree is that the U.S. had some responsibility in the conflict.
We had responsibility in the Ukrainian conflict.
Yes. Lula said recently that Zelensky is as responsible as Putin for the war, and that Biden could have done more to prevent the conflict instead of inciting it. And I think maybe India shares this point of view that the US kind of, I don't know if you had this expression in English, but put wood in the fire, you know, made things get worse.
you have something, Giovanna, and then we'll go to questions after.
I mean, we are and we are United States, but there are also reasons not within the government at the moment, but political landscape, yes. There is a wide debate about which is the role of NATO. Or, I mean, if the enlargement of NATO has been provocative or not. I mean, there are we are more extreme position. They are not the majority position. It's not the majority position, but I think, as I said before, this kind of debate has roots in the different approach of the period in which Western Europe, I mean, divide different in its approach from the United States towards war and the role that Western have to play.
Yeah.
As regards China, when we had our populist government in 2018, we were the only Western country, I think, with Greece, to see the this position was very criticized, and this government, the current government, didn't repeat something like that.
Sorry, that was an agreement with China?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the infrastructure plan.
Oh, infrastructure.
The wide infrastructure plan that China is realized and to link Asia to Europe.
Okay.
Yeah, the Belt and Road Initiative. But now I think Europe has a different awareness. Its relationship with China. And for example, last year, our government stopped an acquisition of a chips company, a semiconductor company. And I think
The company was in Italy?
Yeah.
And a Chinese company wanted to buy it. Okay.
In the recent years, they try also to, I mean, they seen a lot of agreements with university in Italy, Germany, etc. But I think now Europe wants to have an industrial policy different, and they're trying to reshore the most important productions.
Yeah. Okay. I've left very little time for questions. So we probably have time for like one. Unfortunately. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for the great panel, guys. This is probably a question for Adesola and Rodrigo. You both mentioned hunger as a result of the war in Ukraine. Do you have a sense of when those conditions look like they might shape up to be a humanitarian crisis in your countries, and how would that shift public opinion of the war if it changes it at all?
Thanks very much, Rod. That's a very good question. To be frank, I think it just depends on how quickly the war ends. Like I mentioned already, the World Bank is predicting that at the end of this year, if the war prolongs for another 3 months, we'll have like 8 out of every 10 Nigerian severely food insecure. And it's not hard to imagine, because over 30% of our wheat, for example, is from Russia and Ukraine. And food imports is not like the only way that, we get impacted by hunger. I mentioned oil, I mentioned gas. The issue is if you don't even have oil and gas to power your manufacturing industries, to power like productive activities in the economy, it's going to be much more harder to even to avert the crisis, essentially. So to be honest, we need the war to end as quickly as possible, because another 3 months to this would be mainly basically almost every Nigerian adult struggling to feed themselves and their families.
For us, the main issue, like I say, is the inflation. We are a middle income country, and we have the higher security food index in Latin America, according to the economists. They say that we have like we are almost like Europe in that kind of sense, so we don't have problems on that kind of insecurity issues. Of course, the poor people always suffer, especially with higher inflation, and that's going to hurt us a little bit now. Actually, now we have an inflation around 8%, no, around 10% today. That's what is like a record in 25 or 30 years today. So, but it's not that much either compared with other countries in the region. Like in Argentina, they have like 50% or other countries. So, of course, it's gonna be it's an issue, like I say, because we eat a lot of bread every day. So we need like the weight, of course, well, the price to go low.
Rodrigo, did you say that Chileans eat more per capita or just more
More per
wheat?
capita. more
Per cap- so-
per capita.
Why? Do you know why that is?
Because we eat a lot of bread.
Okay, I just wanted
it's
to
in
know.
our main food every day. So
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
more than the double that we're average. So that's not our main concern about the prices, but not about insecurity or hungry.
I think we need to wrap it up, but I wanted to thank everyone on the panel. Thank those of you who came and those who are on the live stream. I think this is clearly the consequences of this go deep and wide. So thank you all for coming to talk about it with us.